Hi, everybody. It's Bob Ost, and it's Friday, and it's July 29th. Is that right? Yes, of course it is. July 29th. This is our 117th consecutive true community gathering. We started doing these April 17th, 2020. Guess why? Can you guess? It's called COVID. No, people weren't able to get together live, so I was convinced to explore the wonderful world of Zoom, and here we are. So we've been doing this now for a long time. It's 2.5 years. Everybody, I know that we want it to be over, and Lord knows there are many ways that it could have been over by now, and we won't even dwell on that. But welcome BA5, whatever BA5 is. We got BA5 and we got a BA 1.12 and we got all sorts of uh, variations of COVID. So we're not out of the woods yet. Luckily, it's not as serious and not as dangerous for most people. Although those of you who don't believe in vaccines and don't believe in masks, just realize that although you might be fine and you might or might not get COVID, and it probably won't be a big deal for you, you could pass it to somebody who could become very, very ill. So let's all be community minded. Let's think about each other. Uh, let's be I want to say sensible, but the people who don't believe what I believe don't think I'm being sensible. They think I'm being silly. So we're all here on the same planet. We're trying to live together. Just know that COVID is not over, and we need to be cautious still. At least we have opened up to live theater. Now, we've talked about a lot of stuff over the past year, 2.5 years, a lot of it relating to creating in a vacuum, creating by yourself, and having to do performances on Zoom. And my favorite question has always been, if we do theater on Zoom, is it still theater? Um, and I've always liked exploring that question. I might actually bring it up with Alex and Jonathan, my guests today. But we're moving back into the real world here, the outside live world, and I'm trying to bring in speakers who have a broader perspective than just what we've been through for 2.5 years. That doesn't mean I'm not going to ask them what happened to them during COVID. I am, but I am very pleased to have two successful theater companies, small to medium size. I don't actually know. Can't talk for your sizes, guys, in terms of what your budgets are. But well-known, well-respected companies that have been producing for around 30 years. One is, I know one of you is definitely 30. I think one of you is approaching 30. So I'm going to bring you guys into the room, and I'm going to introduce everybody to. Uh, oh, wait a second. Believe it or not, I can't do some things because somebody had a hand raised. There. So I'm going to introduce you to Alex Roe, who's you're not the founding artistic director. You're the artistic director. You came in after it was founded, of Metropolitan Playhouse. And Jonathan Bank, who I believe is the founding artistic director. No, you also came in late. So guys, let's talk about the history of your companies. Let's start off that right there. Tell us about yourselves and about your companies. Uh, Alex, tell us a little bit about Metropolitan. I know that it's coming up to its 30th anniversary, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I hate to be disagreeable, but you are mistaken. We passed our 30th anniversary during the pandemic, and this is actually our 31st season that we're about to begin.
I think my question is still relevant.
Maybe all the more so. We are, we
Okay.
are. Yeah, I can't remember whether we are slightly younger than or older than Mitch. The company was founded in 1993, although the actual entity was formed in a hot tub in Santa Cruz in 1976 with none other than Spalding Gray, believe it or not. But that's
Formed in a
all.
hot formed in a hot tub. I mean, there's a title for you.
Yeah,
Is
it
that
really was.
yeah.
Uh, that's when the legal company was founded as an educational and theater enterprise. But one of the founders moved to New York and found some like-minded friends and formed a membership company, and that was in '93, and they continued for 7 or 8 years, and then and founded as a theater dedicated to doing really good work at a reasonable price and education, working with kids. And after some time, I think a lot of the folks in this room or in this Zoom will appreciate it's a lot of work, and your ambitions change as you go on. So all these really lovely group of artists, I know a lot of them, I'm still in touch with a number of them, but sought someone to, like Hercules from Atlas, take the theater off their shoulders. And it just happened to be that's what I was looking to do. I had been acting and directing actually in the city for about the same amount of time. I moved to New York in '93 and had just about then decided, 3 or 5 years, I'm going to found a theater company, and I want to be more than a show by show jobber and create something that would have some lasting presence on the horizon. And there they handed me the keys. So I found myself with a theater company well
So
before I expected to.
so you didn't have to found a theater company; you just had to find a theater company.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I did found the theater. Yeah, that's right. I found the theater company. That's how I founded it.
Jonathan Bank, welcome. I've known you both for probably since you've been running the. I think I've known you both for 30 years. Jonathan, you want to talk a little bit about the formation of Mint?
Well, Mint was formed. The corporate paperwork was fall of 1992, and and the company was founded, also a membership company, founded by Kelly Morgan. And Kelly and I had gone to grad school together in Ohio at Case Western Reserve 10 years earlier, graduating around 10 years earlier. He was a year ahead of me. And I became involved in the fall of 93, and Kelly, I don't remember exactly the timing on this. Shortly thereafter, within a couple of years of my becoming involved and becoming associate artistic director, or I think was my title. And then Kelly said that he needed to go on sabbatical for a while, and would I mind the shop? And then his, the short period became a longer period. And somewhere around 95, 96, I said to Kelly, listen, you can come back and you can run your membership company, or not, but I'm not going to run your company anymore. If I'm doing this awful job at the time, and particularly, as Alex, it's running a theater company is not an awful job. Running a membership company is an awful job. We could get Scott Allen Evans on here to join us in talking about the challenges of answering to members,
You both bring up an interesting point. I hadn't even thought about it. A lot of people in the room, I'm sure, have thought about or are thinking about starting a theater company. Do you know the founding stories? Because you both came in a little late, so that's also an interesting question. What was involved in you coming in and taking over what somebody else had created, and how did you start shaping it so that it suited your temperament and your needs and your interests?
I'll bet Alex's story is cleaner than mine.
Yeah, I feel like your story is going to be a lot more interesting than mine, though, Jonathan. I'll get mine out of the way fast. The members who were, I think there were 6 members at the time, with a wonderful and storied and I'm sure fascinating history that I didn't know. And these were some great friends and really lovely people. David Zarko, David Carson, Edward Shemley, Paige Clements all jumped to mind. Devon Brown was a part of it then, and Coleman Zygan, I think Dwayne Knock, people that many of you all may know. And I hope, gosh, I'm not forgetting anybody. Cynthia Hewitt, who I'm still working with from time to time.
So let's get into one basic. Why did they form it? What was their mission?
Right,
And how,
and see, that's the trouble. I look over the old board meetings and I'll say that they were, as I said, like-minded people who wanted to create theater at a reasonable cost and work with kids. They had an educational program. But I can't say more than that. And they were your actors and directors and writers, and there a number of other names come to mind that I won't go through them all now. And I think that they enjoyed working together and wanted that collaborative spirit, which let's put it plainly, I don't know that I share or am capable of doing. So when they handed me the keys, I pretty shortly felt, well, I think with the expectation that I might form a new group, a new membership, but I felt that a more conventional board of directors at whose pleasure I serve, with, I hope, a benign dictatorship, would be a more plausible way of running the theater that I wanted to run, rather than working with a number of members. But I didn't have any of the experience, I think, that Jonathan did, of actually trying to do it.
Jonathan, you want to jump in a little?
Yeah, I'm mindful of the number of people on this and this red dot that says recording. So certain.
Yeah, we're good. This is going to be on YouTube.
Certain secrets must be preserved, but
Okay.
I mean, they weren't secrets to the people who were there, but I mean, Kelly founded a company that you call it a membership company, but it's pay to play. I mean, let's call it what it is. And I will say that that model didn't appeal to me. But so, I mean, what happened was there was a board. I mean, it was an incorporated not-for-profit company that Kelly and a handful of others put together and filed the paperwork and whatnot. And there was a board, and then ultimately the board hired me and fired Kelly. And this was the kind of the second time in my life that I was involved in seeing a founder displaced by a board.
Well, let's go back. Let's go to some basics then. Let's talk about infrastructure. Let's talk about what it takes to have a working company, a company that actually is functioning. You both have touched on the board. Having a board is requirement of a not-for-profit, if I'm not mistaken, because I are one.
You are correct. A board of trustees is, and you may be headed somewhere, but I'm going to, I'll just take over for a second.
Take it, go for it.
And say that, that a board is, so there's a long, I don't know how long, but there is a history of corporate boards in the for-profit world. And when and I don't really pretend to know all the ins and outs of the history of not-for-profit, but it's important to understand that not-for-profit is a relatively new thing. And the kind of art-oriented theaters that existed 100 years ago were whether they were intended to make a profit or not, there was no such thing as not-for-profit. There was no such thing as the exchange of not paying taxes for not earning profits that would go back to owners. But anyway, my point is that the board structure is it has over the years, I think, turned into something that that there's not necessarily unanimity of agreement about how it should be why it should be. I think the origins of it are rather condescending, patronizing, and that the idea is that we, the community, are giving you a tax exemption, but you are artists and you are not capable of managing your business. So it is important that you be surrounded by representatives of the community who will keep you solvent and keep you on the straight and narrow path of honoring your mission. But it does presume that artists aren't capable of managing business, and that outsiders are necessary for that purpose.
Of course, you can also put people on your board that are within your industry. They don't have to be corporate. There are different ways of structuring a board. The only point that I want everybody to understand is that if you're somebody that, and you're doing shows and you're doing a lot of different shows and you're producing and self-producing or whatever you're doing with friends, and you decide you want to have a theater company, it's something you need to think about before you actually jump in and do it, because there are a lot of things that are attached to the idea of actually having a not-for-profit theater company. One of them is the board. The other is fiscal responsibility. You have to really track everything very meticulously. So my question, I'm keep circling the same question. We'll get past this. I promise you. I promise you we'll get to other things. But to Alex and to you both, what did you come to learn when you moved into this structure that was handed you, how did you adjust the structure of the companies that you came into? Because you didn't found them; they were there, and you came in. You learned stuff in the first couple of years that probably led you to.
Bob, I think Alex and I both learned that democracy is not a terrific way to run an arts organization, and that the benign dictator, just as in the rehearsal room, that same structure where somebody is in charge, works best.
Okay, Alex, the same issues for you in terms of your board. Board is
No. Well, the board is
necessary evil.
No, well, the board. Well, I didn't say that.
I didn't either. I didn't say they were evil at all.
No, you just said that basically there's it's based on a premise that you don't necessarily agree with, which is that artists need outside overseeing.
Well, look, the premise exists in the corporate world as well, but in the corporate world, the notion of outside is I think less paternalistic. But it's not a critical point. It's where it, Bob, and I'm sorry, Alex, but the thing that is actually, I would say, maybe interesting about there are a number of funders, state funders, government funders, who think the idea that having an artistic director on the board is a very poor practice.
Well,
so
I'm on my board, so.
Well, there are there are certain places where that's frowned upon, and whether you suffer consequences because of that frowning or not is it is another matter. But the idea that I think this is going back 26, 7, 8 years and carrying forward, the idea that anybody who sits on my board cares more than I do is my board knows that's not the case. I mean, and they don't pretend that it isn't. Well, Jane Dubin is making a comment that
I'm in trouble. It's basically her because I'm
Well,
president and executive director of True.
I don't have an executive director, so.
Well, let's go back to some of the other aspects of the structure. But we don't have to dwell on the board. Although I have people who really want to know. I may do a session just on the care and use of a board of directors. I've always felt, and right or wrong, I've always felt that optimally there should be somebody that is taking care of the artistic decisions, and then somebody that is doing the business side of it. Have you ever worked with a managing director, or have you guys both been your own artistic director and managing director? And would you continue doing that, or would you like that to change?
Well, let me jump in because I feel like most of what we've discussed regarding boards and membership or structure so far is I don't have a lot of it's not really congruent with my experience. Although I appreciate and endorse what Jonathan has said about the generation perhaps of boards and the relationships. And so it'd be an interesting conversation about what that structural relationship can be or might be. And I think we both have a healthy relationship with our boards. And as far as managing, I'm actually seeking a managing director or someone to share the administrative load. I've had different people fill with different levels of responsibility that role before. But your question, I think, affirms what I'm not sure is true of the Mint right now. But my having followed advice that Jonathan gave me when I took over Metropolitan Playhouse, and he said, you have to do everything yourself at first so that you learn what needs to be done. And I sort of still feel like I'm learning. So I am indeed in charge of everything, and take some role in production matters and in hygiene matters and COVID safety matters right now, but in production and finance and casting and every part of it goes through what Jane might refer to as me as an executive director. And I'm actually eager to share that load with someone. Have an evolving job description that I have yet to make public. But the reason being, having one person who is the prime mover and through whom, without whom nothing is quite empowered to happen, I think creates a bottleneck and a degree of friction and slowdown for the organization that has not worked over the years. And it's worked over the years because here we are heavily in the black and doing very, very well. But I think could work better. And I would love to share some of that load with someone. I'm very conscious of the audience I'm speaking to. There might be somebody who wants to talk to me about what that is. And Jonathan, if you're looking for work, I think you do an admirable job. I'd love to have you team up. So Bob, you've done an incredible thing. So but anyway,
I just want to say, in sort of support of some of the underlying truths that we're floating above. I have tended to do everything in my company. I complain about it all the time, and I constantly am trying to delegate. And in the past year, I put a program into the hands of board members, and what I would have done in like 3 weeks took a year. So what happens when you have multiple people? It may not just be the board; it's just the fact that there's multiple personalities involved instead of one personality saying this is what we're going to do. The discussion just gets so into the weeds, and it takes a long time for anything to finally get decided. At least that's my experience.
But as John said, nobody cares as much about Mint as he does. And nobody, as much as people care about it, nobody has the same level of commitment and caring. And it's going to be there to turn the lights on and turn the lights off as I am at Metropolitan. And I think, that becomes, it's a curse and a blessing and a curse both. So, I think that's what you're grappling with. And as far as, democratic principles, I think Jonathan alluded to the pay to play model of the membership. And just to touch back on that briefly, I think it's kind of a will work for food model as I've always looked at it. If you have people who are invested in the company and want to see it survive, and you can come up with some measure, be it a salary or a degree of responsibility or of investment or control of whatever people want, whatever it is that brings them to it. I think, sharing the responsibilities of management is a wonderful thing, but I think it's very hard to find anyone, not who will do what you say. It's not the autocrat's dilemma. It's just to find anyone who really is willing to be there when no one else will. And that's, I think, the position I've always been in Metropolitan. And I imagine Jonathan is too, but that's my piece on it.
I have shared responsibility with numerous people I mean, not that many people, with a couple people over the years. Bob, my attitude, I mean, despite whatever it was I said to Alex about, you have to do everything yourself, so you know how to do it. It is helpful to know how to do it. But I haven't done, there's lots of things that I don't do and that I haven't done for years. But the two-headed structure that was conventional and at another point in time, I think it is fading. But the idea that that art and business need to be in conflict with each other, that need to be in a conversation that is, that where the business manager or executive director is there to kind of rein in the artistic director, and the artist, that I think misses the point, so that we are, I mean, Alex and our companies are making something with an eye towards selling it, with an eye towards raising money for it, with an eye, that we're not that those things aren't, those points are not are not, they don't belong to a separate silo. Is really what I think is it, so that the two-headed structure in which fundraising and marketing and are not part of the storytelling of the organization, that doesn't make sense to me.
Agreed.
So having help
I think classically that basically all people are really talking about is that for an artistic director to have full artistic command of everything, it's usually, and I know you're not going to agree with this, but it's usually helpful to have somebody who is looking at the business side of it and saying, we can't afford that. Or if you want to do that, where are we going to take the money? What are we going to take the money from? It's basically like an artist, a creative producer, and a general manager. The general manager sort of telling the producer that, you can do this, but you have to realize that other things have to be taken into account if you're going to do this. So
right, that Alex has that conversation with himself all the time.
Yeah, okay.
And who better equipped to make those decisions, and how better equipped than being familiar with the composition of the budget. And
well, I just want to acknowledge both of you as being skillful on both sides of it, and not everybody is. So, as running through, I come across hundreds of theater companies over the years. Some of them, a handful of them, manage to make it. A lot of them don't, and a lot of it that I have observed is the fact that a lot of people that are wanting to make theater and have a theater company don't necessarily understand the business as well as you guys apparently do.
Well, I'm gonna, we're talking about origin stories, and really in the early 90s, when I had just become involved but was not yet, I mean, maybe it happened while Kelly was away the first time, or in the early days of his being away, but I attended some Art New York, specifically an Art New York workshop with George Thorne and Nella McDaniel, and should be a familiar name to many.
Absolutely.
Well, and they put forward the idea, and what I'm doing, Bob, is really arguing that I wasn't good at it, but what George and Nello put forward was the idea that the skills that you do have, whether it be your skills as a director, your skills in casting, your skills in running the room, your ability to arrive at the first preview with everybody knowing their lines and understanding the play and telling the story, that on-time delivery record doesn't exist in other industries. And so the artists making the art have the skills to do everything else if they think about it properly. And that piece of advice or that lesson, helped me to understand that a marketing flyer, I thought about it as a play. So I thought about the exposition and what I was going to do on the outside flap, to kind of get your attention, to see if I could get you leaning forward in your seat, and then where I was going to close the sale, which is where am I going to climax, how does the play climax, and what do I need to do to help shape that or create focus for that. And it was, and then I came to understand, I didn't have any idea how to use a spreadsheet or to make a budget, but I understood that it was a story.
Oh, you arrived just in
And
the
that
nick of
Oh,
time.
wait a second. Pinky, turn your mic off.
That the budget itself is a story, and it tells a story, and it's the story of your priorities. It's the story of what's important to you. And when I reshaped budgets as my priorities changed, wait a minute, how am I going to organize? I remember the moment when I stopped organizing expenses by production and started organizing them by category, sets and lights and costumes for several productions, because I stopped thinking that we were going to fold every show, and I started to think we're going to survive and we're going to do other shows this year, and that meant a new story, telling a story in a new way.
I want to throw this, Bob, if I may, just in the model, I think Jonathan is exactly right, and it's exactly the process, in our different ways that we go through. And I think, teams of people can do that. I think pairs of people, wonderful collaborators. It's like devised theater versus scripted theater versus, improv. There are all sorts of different ways of coming to that. But that's the important thing to understand, is that the art itself drives the business, and the business responds to the art, and it they are hand in hand. I think that's a really interesting recognition. That's important.
Okay, so basically, and interestingly enough, luckily enough, this is a lot of what we're going to be covering on Sunday's workshop that we're giving essentials of successful self-producing. We talk about exactly what you're talking about, which is basically knowing who you are at the moment that you're doing what the job is that you're doing. When you're the artistic director, you're thinking in one mode, but when you're the marketing person, you're thinking in another mode. And when you're going to be the business manager or the person that's doing the budgets, the point is that somebody's got to be taking on the roles, and if it's one person taking on all the roles, fine, as long as you know how to do it, and you guys obviously know how to do it, so you're taking on multiple roles. Which is fine. You're successful. You're here's the proof. I mean, you're here 30 years later. I'm just behind you. We're 29 years.
And sharing it as we can, as Bob, as Jonathan's observed, we do have people helping out. I think we're probably both still the supreme authority, but have hand different responsibilities over to different people at different times with an understanding.
I've arrived at a point where I am. There are things that I don't want, that I don't think I'm doing well anymore, and I am working on a new model for the future, and I've had conversations with a handful of people where, that I want to arrive at a point where I'm not in the way because I fear that I might be. However, I would say, Bob, just to go, the difference is, I mean, for this may change in the future because it will be necessary as I involve other people. But the fact of the matter is that for most of my career at the Mint, I have picked a play, done my research on the play, done my thinking about the play and my feeling about the play, and I write a page of boilerplate that describes, I begin with the sentence. This is the story of, basically. And I would say that, the marketing copy and the development copy all come out of that, what I have written, not with what I've written, which is not intended to be marketing and it is not intended to be development.
But basically, it's called messaging. I'm from a marketing background. So essentially, you're absolutely right. All the messaging from your product needs to be the same message. You can't be sending different messages. So it all should come from your original outline of what your intention is and what your feelings are about the show. I'm going to move us from this to another topic in a second. I want to remind the room that we welcome questions in the chat so that we can respond to them. And if you want to respond to anything that's being said here or question anything that we're saying, we want to hear from you. There's also a reactions window which you can click. It's at the bottom of your screen towards the right, and that will give you a virtual hand raise. So a virtual hand raise will also let us know that you would like to say something or comment or question. And I want to also acknowledge Donald Loftus. Is it naive to think that an artistic director could have a pre-agreement with the board regarding where their authority begins and ends? I don't know. I don't know if any of us know that. That's a legal question because I don't know if you can legally put restrictions on your board.
I have. I do have bylaws that
we have bylaws, absolutely bylaws,
and the bylaw and the bylaws allow certain things and disallow other things. And however, if my board decided that they didn't want to abide by the limitations of the bylaws, they could simply vote to change the
bylaws, of course.
Right.
So let's see. James Dubin says bylaws and the state laws dictate what each party's responsibilities are. In the broad sense, yes, but I think we're thinking in terms of some of the details of when. Again, this is something I want to stay away from because I don't want to say anything that's not legally absolutely sure.
The whole meeting could go down this particular hole too, as you suggested, Bob.
I want to just see, in the city we're renting a theater. It's extremely expensive. But yeah, I wanted to get to your theater spaces, but before I do that, I want to get to your missions. How did you both come to such a similar mission? And tell us a little bit about your missions, and tell us how you differ. There's a challenge for you. How do you differ in your approaches to your respective missions? Alex, you start.
Oh, well, yeah, I don't know that I can say how we came at them together, although Jonathan and I have known.
Oh, I didn't mean I just mean independently. You both suddenly became dedicated to unearthing American treasures.
No, I understand.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex. You'll clear
We've
this
known each other. I can't remember when we first met, but we've known each other before we were a part of our respective institutions, I think. But my Metropolitan had discovered a sort of inclination and a talent the members felt for turn of the century plays and an interest in finding what was going on in America at the turn of the century, early 20th century. And this was through a production of The Poor of New York. They did a wonderful job of it. This is Dion Boucicaut, an Irish playwright, actually playing, long history of that. But when I came along, I had the freedom to make the mission whatever I wanted to. I was the artistic director, and there was nothing in the bylaws about what the mission was going to be. But I looked at this sort of untapped trove, so far as I saw it, and I still see it, of what I think they then wanted to refer to as pre-1920, or some would say pre-Eugene O'Neill American theater. And that was not in its own way interesting to me as a formal definition, because it's not maybe arbitrary, things happen in the world. But what I did find in looking at some of the plays, from the first one we produced under my aegis, which was a William C. DeMille, and that is the famous DeMille family play, called The Woman, was a real correspondence and fascinating source of information about our contemporary, today's culture in the theater, largely the theater that had been overlooked or forgotten from our past. And so our mission is to discover America culturally through its theater. Typically, I gravitate towards lost plays or forgotten plays from the deeper past for two reasons. On the one hand, everybody can see an Arthur Miller play. I mean, we might do, there are a few actually that we might do coming up, and the Metropolitan has done the American Clock years ago. But there are a lot of plays that people are familiar with, and largely more recent plays from the later 20th century. And I don't really feel like New York needs us to do them. They will see these productions of these plays. But what we can do is show people plays of moment, of political provocation, or maybe forgotten political arguments, the side that lost a political argument that they don't know, but that are still influencing the culture we live in today. So our mission, is not limited to, as many people feel, and I'm certainly not saying this is what Jonathan's mission is at all, but people think of Metropolitan as being an old-time theater. You do 19th century plays, you do melodramas, you do turn of the century. And we do, because it's a fascinating trope, but we have, done plays from the 90s, plays from the 70s, plays from the 40s, certainly. Wonderful group of plays from the Federal Theater Project or the WPA era, which was, shut down largely by Congress. And here are plays and voices that got kind of forgotten, but I thought were seminally important, and now are kind of finding a new voice. So that was how I came across the mission. It was with this formal mission, Old American Plays, which I really have discovered and invested in as a way of understanding our culture through artistic expression. It's more interesting to do plays that are either forgotten or overlooked because they have a lot of compelling things to tell us, or, in my personal penchant, often for a play from a greater distance, because I love the perspective that gives. I don't really want to see a living room play from today. I don't know if anybody's writing those anymore, but let us take ourselves to another era, because I live that. I love the perspective we get. But I just want to give a shout out to someone I know in the audience. The last main stage full length production we performed was D.W. Gregory's Radium Girls, written in 2000, and that was about events in the 20s. But so it fit the mission of finding a cultural moment and expressing it through theater. But Radium Girls, a wonderful play that it is, written in 2000, had yet to see a professional production in New York, and it made perfect sense for us to do it. So that's a wonderful example, I think, of what our mission is. And I hope I've explained more or less how I came.
It also gives hope to every playwright in the room. So thank you for that. Jonathan, do you want to talk about how you came to your mission?
Well, we are not focused on American work. We do, I would say, less American work than we do English and Irish combined. And we have done. We tend to, but because we're doing neglected plays, they tend to be written in English because the neglected plays in other languages are not translated. So there, and my limitation is that I can't, if I can't read it, I can't decide to do it. So we have done a couple of plays by Schnitzler. We've done a handful of plays written in other languages where a translation existed. And often that's a translation that needs to be freshened up. We've done that a number of times. But so that's one point. But the reason, and I will give offense to some in the audience right now, I'm afraid, but I'm going to just forge ahead and be truthful. That my interest in doing plays that people had not seen was I'm really interested in a conventional narrative structure, an Aristotelian kind of narrative, and I was interested in the audience having an Aristotelian kind of experience of engagement in narrative, engagement in the story, and not an engagement in the directorial cleverness of whoever was putting the show together or designing it, whatever. But so that I used to say, that I wanted the conversation at intermission to be, what do you think is going to happen? Not, how do you think Bank will deal with the closet scene? I've seen 4 Hamlets this year, and I'm wondering what this director has to, to say. And if you want an audience wondering what's going to happen next, and if you want to be able to surprise them with the ending, they can't have seen it before. So to me, that, that led me to plays that were not being produced. And, what I discovered early in that pursuit was there was a lot of good stuff. And that continues to be true. Yeah, you've muted yourself, Bob.
Oh, that's right, because there was some background noise here. Okay, so that leads me to another question, which was, how did you find your audiences, and how long did it take you before you, or have you gotten there yet, where you actually have enough of a following and enough of an audience that you are relatively certain that if you produce something, they will come. If you build it, they will come. Where does do you have subscription audiences, either of you?
I don't.
We offer memberships, and they've always been very small. Subscription or membership. Part I maybe because I do pull so many of the strings, don't always get the season planned or announced in time and so on. Yeah, but I remember Jonathan and I once talking about whether or not that was even a viable model. So I'll let him speak to that thing. But from the start, I have found people were interested in what we were doing, and that was thrilling to me. I mean, really, the third production I did, someone said, "Oh, I see what you're doing here." So it happened, with the seasons and how the plays connected to one another. So it happened fairly early on. I know that we will get an audience, and I'm delighted and thrilled with the recidivists, and people come from around the country to see everything we do. Do we have enough? No, I think I run a 50-seat theater, and we could sell out a run with 1,000 people. And we don't always get 1,000 people, but I know there are 1,000 people in New York, walking the streets right now who would be happy to really love what we do. So we don't get the word out the way I'd like to. Job one, I suppose, or maybe job two, but it's something we should really work on. We have a loyal and a wonderful audience. I love seeing the people who come to see everything we do, but I think there are a lot more people that that would enjoy it. So no, I haven't gotten there yet.
Well, this leads me to two questions, actually. First of all, let's talk about real estate for a second. Let's talk about where you've been able to, what you've called home over the years. Your home, both of you have Jonathan, I remember you at, I think 311 West 43rd, is that right? 311?
Correct. Yes.
For years. Was there a home for Mid Theater prior to that? Or since I know you, you were there.
No, we had two spaces in that building, but from 92 to 2015.
And prior to that, did you have a home space that you used?
No, 92. Was
Oh,
when we
92.
started.
Oh, 92. That's right. Okay. Not my math isn't so good. So, how important, if you're advising somebody who wants to start a theater company, how important is it for them to have a home space? A lot of people don't. A lot of people just produce wherever they can produce. That's to either of you.
You know, having a home space has its advantages, and I can't, and I, but Alex, you know, when, you know, that when we lost our home space, we lost the lease where we were, you know, the landlord, the building changed hands in twice in 2000, between 2014 and 2015, and the last set of owners had no interest in negotiating with me at all. But I realized, you know, subsequent to that, that I did not have keys to the building where we were performing, that I was not going to be the first one in, and that I did not need to be the last one out. And that was a great relief, really, you know. So I was happy to not have the responsibility for the building. But I don't think I can answer how important it is. But I'll tell you this story, you know, from my own experience. The first show that we did outside of 311 West 43rd Street, we did at City Center Stage 2 in the winter of 2016, play called Women Without Men by Hazel Ellis, an Irish woman. And the first, well, two things. One, and that's a 3/4 space, very different from what we'd been accustomed to. I eliminated one section of seating so that we could actually have some walls, and that people could walk in and see something that, you know, looked a little bit more like a traditional set. That, but I think at the final dress rehearsal, watching this, I said, "Oh, this feels like a Mint play." And I realized, you know, that where we were wasn't the definition of the Mint aesthetic; it was the work itself. And then at the first preview, I remember I was, you know, just girding my loins, kind of ready for that initial audience to complain to me, and to, you know, and to ask about, you know, to talk about how much they love the old space, and to complain about all the stairs at City Center, you know, whatever it was going to be. And
a lot of us love the old space.
Yeah, well, the old space had an intimacy, you know, that was fantastic. And I felt that the old space, you know, I thought there was something rare and wonderful about what we were able to accomplish there. And I felt that it contributed significantly to the experience of the audience, including, I used to say, you know, that as the elevator goes up, the expectations go down, and it made it easier to kind of wow people, because you were coming into an office building and taking an elevator to the 3rd floor, and suddenly, you know, there was this magical thing happening. However, this first preview, an old, you know, I mean, a a longstanding patron, kind of ambled over to me, Mr. Bank. And I thought, okay, here it comes. And he said, now in the last play, I noticed that, the leading woman was wearing or wasn't wearing a wedding ring or whatever it was that, that he'd held on to for 5 months since that show in the fall. And I just breathed a sigh of relief and said, it'll all be fine. They're coming to the Mint here now, and they'll come to the Mint wherever we are. It's the work itself, not the space.
Just to state the obvious, it's easier for many reasons to actually have a space rather than to constantly reinvent. And also, you're in a familiar space and you know how it works, and you don't have to learn new rules every time you produce a show. But it's also, in some cases, not in your case necessarily, but in some cases, it also comes down to having an extra job, which means not only being an artistic director but also being a landlord in some situations. Alex, how many different spaces have you been through, and what is your experience? How do you feel when you don't have it? There's been time when you didn't have a space, I think. Wasn't there a period?
No, not really. There's it's a different set of problems. I don't and a different set of rewards. I think our productions are so strongly associated with our 3/4 space because the space itself becomes a part of the show. You're seeing the audience across the way, but only once have we had to leave it before we went into the virtual realm, for a year and a half and presented on Zoom, which was a whole new discovery for what a Metropolitan show was and what our audience was. But I love that our space is so clearly identified with our work, but I also know, as Jonathan articulated so well, that a Metropolitan show is a Metropolitan show, and it will have its distinctive charms and virtues wherever it is. I just happen to love using it. We don't rent it, so it's not really allowed by our lease. So I'm seldom a landlord, although I found ways of sharing the space with people very constructively. And yet it does mean I have a rent to meet every month. I think probably the finances are the same. Adapting to a new space, doing a load in, it's a different thing, but just I think different headaches. I wouldn't say one is necessarily better than the other. And I really do love having a place to go to. I haven't gotten tired of it or how to use it. I like that we can store our props there, that I don't have to, that my office is there, not here at home where I am. There's a lot of things I love.
Let everybody know where your space is now, because and also you used to be in a different space. I could swear you were like East 88 or something like that.
When Metropolitan Playhouse started, it was in a high school auditorium, the High School for Designing Graphic Arts. I want to say, I might be wrong about that, up on 59th Street. But that was, prior to my recorded history. When I joined Metropolitan, when I got the keys, it was a couple of years in the current space, which is at 220 East 4th between A and B. That's better known to people as the Connolly Center, and the Connolly Theater is below us. The whole building was renovated in the year the Metropolitan moved in, and that's when the Connolly Theater started as a weekly rental space. And when my predecessors, really with David Zarka's leadership and Dwayne Knox's work, did the renovation, that is pretty much the current 3/4, marvelously designed space that it is. But we've been there every year since. We did once, because of conflict with the neighboring theater, have to do a festival, a series of shows over at what do they call it now, 9th Street, the PS 121 space, when it was rented out. But that too proved, a show that we do is one of our shows wherever we do it. And yet we are pretty strongly associated with our space, and I love the virtues of it.
Amy Stoller actually gives the best answer to the question. One plus of having a regular space is that your audience knows where to find you. There are a lot of companies that just don't have it.
If you're in the Far East Village, some people still can't find us. So there's a plus and a.
Well, what Amy is, it is true that people can go to the wrong place because they don't do their due diligence. Now, we did a show this year. I mean, we did a show at City Center in in January and a show at Theater Row in June. Next year, we're going to do a show at City Center in November and a show at Theater Row in January. And, you know, we're training our audience now to check the address. But I would say, just as a point of interest, that the biggest loss for us of not having our own space is, and it's also a gain in the sense that it's released me from a lot of burdens, but not running our own box office means not controlling our own data, and that's a loss. But not having to staff a box office, and you know, but also the economics are different, you know, when you're paying somebody else, if collecting a facility fee that's going to somebody else and all that kind of thing.
I know Jonathan's okay with time. Alex, are you okay with time, or
Oh, sure. I feel like we're only getting to the interesting stuff. But
okay,
whatever the traffic will allow, Bob.
I want to remind the room that we're eager to hear from you. As interactive as you want to be, we'd appreciate it. At least I'd appreciate it. I want to move to one other point, which is the COVID point. How did COVID affect you? How did you adjust? What did you do during COVID? And are you now comfortably coming back into live performance? Either one of you.
I'm happy to speak, Alex, but I'm happy to defer.
I have one trick, so I'll save it.
We began 10 years ago making 3-camera archival recordings of all of our productions in front of a live audience. And so in spite of my skepticism about the value of those recordings, I knew that I wouldn't want to watch them. At a certain point, I mean, it's actually maybe a funny story. My business manager said that she was going to get a PPP loan for us. And I said, don't bother, I can't spend it. And she said, you know what, I'm going to get the money anyway, and we'll figure it out. And then a few months later, she said, gosh, I'm sorry, you were right. You're going to have to pay, 1% interest on this $90,000, and we'll just return it. But, and I said, well, wait a minute. I could stream. I mean, I have the work if all we have to do is just shovel this money out to actors. I mean, I'd rather do that than return it. And I devised a plan for our initial streaming, which was I did 3 shows simultaneously in a 2-week period. And the actors were all getting the same salary they got from our last production of live performances. So in the 500s. But I decided, I called it a summer stock. We did it in July. And I thought, I'm going to do 3 shows simultaneously because you're only going to watch 10 minutes. And maybe I can get you to watch 10 minutes of 2 different plays, and you'll at least see, how pretty our sets are, or, something. And I was stunned by how eager the world was, primarily America, but ultimately, 49 different countries where people were to watch a play. And they watched they watched to the end, they donated. It was astonishing to me. And then we did quite a bit more streaming over the course of the next year. Ultimately, I think it was 8 productions, and many of them for 8 weeks or longer. And we tripled our donor base in 2021, not our donation base, but the number of people who were contributing. And each play was seen online by an audience, kind of per household, equal to the number of households that saw the play in the theater. So, and it was so on mission for us to share these plays with a broader audience. So it was great.
I want to ask you one tricky question about that. What was your agreement with Equity in terms of filming these archivally, and what happened when you were going to actually start showing them?
Every production we did an archival video rider that was signed by everybody, that so that we were always above board. You're allowed to make an archival recording. The rules about the archival recording are, and certainly were over the 10 years that we were doing it, you can make this recording as long as you never show it to anybody, basically. And I said, that's all right. One day we'll negotiate an agreement with you. It's ridiculous. It seemed absurd to me that would never happen. And I wanted a record of the work because, that was on mission for us. And frankly, when we began it, we just had a good year. And we had a June benefit for a year that was in the block already. And I just said, we're going to make this benefit. We're going to use all the funds from the benefit, and everybody who bought tickets knew or donated knew that we were creating what I called at the time a preservation fund. And so so the money that I spent on making the recordings over the years came out of that fund, and I never had to kind of decide whether I could afford it this year or could afford it for this show, or did I like this show enough to make the record. I just did it. We eventually ran out of money, but then we collected more in 2020 for that fund, and it's healthy again. So that's
pretty impressive. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Kind of amazing.
It's probably, it's the smartest thing I've ever done, obviously, but it really didn't.
Even if it was by accident.
Well, it wasn't by accident. It's funny because I did find, I started doing it in 2013. I found a grant. We recorded our first show in 1998. We recorded The Fifth Column by Mr. Hemingway because I knew that was of historical value. And we did that on a SAG educational contract that allowed me to send out 100 DVDs to professors all across the world so that they could teach the play in their classes, and actors got a couple extra $100. But when I was raising the money to make that recording, I discovered this last year, that I wrote in a grant application, a proposal for funding. I said, I can imagine the day. And this was in 2007. I said, I can imagine the day when we'll be able to post all of our videos up on our website and make them available to students and to teachers and to audiences. And because all you had to do was kind of look around and see that Netflix was no longer shipping DVDs. They were, that one day there would be streaming would come to the theater. So I did.
So another question though is, when you created your streaming platform for the pieces, did you have to negotiate a new contract with anybody? Did you do the Equity contract that you said you were going to do?
Sure. Equity came out with terms. And we abided by the terms. And then Equity revised their terms very much in favor of the producers, or I should say it was much less expensive to stream because they were trying to incentivize people doing it, because not many, and I don't know, I mean, I don't know how, there's a series of COVID related agreements. I mean, the COVID media agreements, there are 5 different categories. I don't know how many people were doing the archival the way we were. Most people were doing other things on that list of agreements.
Well, also, a lot of us, once we were in shutdown, we were creating things on Zoom,
Right.
and so SAG-AFTRA was the agreement. There was a lot of back and forth with Equity and SAG. To be honest, it was very frustrating and confusing for a long time. But ultimately, your pieces all started as theater pieces, so it seems like it was clearly an Equity agreement. You wouldn't have had to have engaged SAG-AFTRA with it.
No, now you do. I mean, there's the new off-Broadway agreement allows anybody to make archival recordings, and anybody to stream the archival recordings with a rather significant buyout to the actor, an AEA recognition fee equal to, well, the specifics of it don't matter, but there's a recognition fee, and then you pay SAG-AFTRA based on what you're doing. So if you're, so I haven't really, I mean, for me to pay the recognition, one day, I'll say it here for the first and last time to whoever's left in the audience, will pay recognition fees to the, the 150 or 200 actors or whatever it is that, that are on all of our recordings, and we'll have our own, Roku channel or something, and pay, on demand fees to actors.
Well, I'm gonna move the question to Alex because it's getting late. And
Yeah.
I'm going to have to wind up soon. But Alex, the same question to you. How did COVID affect you, and what did you do?
Well, yeah, we did not do that. We didn't have the archival videos, but also I wasn't so inclined to do it. And yet I think the end result for us was very, very similar. We have a much broader donation base, and much, an international audience that we didn't have before, because I invested very, very heavily in making Zoom work for theater. And trying to discover when you didn't have theater, what was the essential of theater is what I finally realized we were doing. So we started on March 28th, a week after we left the theater, and I thought maybe for the last time ever, I got some actors whom I'd worked with before together to do very much on mission an Alice Gerstenberg play. And we read it, in one of these dreary Zoom meetings where everybody's just like this, with maybe a blurred background or something. And I thought, well, that was kind of fun, and it looks like we're going to be out here another week. So here's a Eugene O'Neill play, The Rope, that nobody had done in a long time. It was a short play, manageable size, and people tuned in, and more people tuned in. And boy, that one was hard. All sorts of mistakes made, and so on. And so I realized, and we were getting donations for it. We didn't charge for any of these. So, long story short, 15 months later, I had almost 100 different broadcasts of or new shows anyway, of some of them full length, most of them one act, and we would follow them with scholarly commentary. And it enabled us to explore a repertoire because of the one act format that we wouldn't have probably, but very much what we do. So we delved into Provincetown Playhouse plays and the other ones, not Eugene O'Neill or Susan Glaspell, although they were represented. Got into some early Harlem Renaissance plays. There was a Eulalie Spence play we did. We found some Willis Richardson, who was the first African-American playwright ever to have a serious drama on Broadway. Found some 19th century curtain raiser and did that, a sort of ridiculous comedy, but that worked. A very early colonial era Thanksgiving play. So we really found a way of investing in our mission through the readings. But the big challenge was, readings are really hard to watch. I think everybody got tired of them. So I kept trying to find ways of funding them up with artist-drawn backgrounds, and discovered software that allowed me to manipulate both the backgrounds and create moving images and really move the actors around and put them in frames and remove them from their backgrounds. And here's my trick, I could do this as many times as I wanted to. And it was great fun to to play with the medium and still find a theatrical engagement by moving them around. But it wasn't like the Brady Bunch, people being on screen. It was this new format, which I found terribly exciting. And then I guess the last thing I want to say about that was it allowed us to support many more actors. I find that I have a company of hundreds of actors that I hadn't really realized before. We were able to give them work and give them money. We paid more and more and more to everybody, far above our usual off-Broadway showcase scale, reached a much larger audience. And this was all through an agreement with the unions that we could air them as fundraisers for 4 days, and then we had to take them down. So now I have, well, I'm not supposed to have an archive, but there is an archive that nobody can see, similar to what Jonathan says, of these video experiments that really did broaden our reach and earned us a lot of very, very grateful. I blush to say the number of people who said, you got me through the pandemic, because we were really doing it during what I considered the worst part of the shutdown. When we stopped about a month ago, I thought, well, the pandemic's over, vaccines are out, we won't have to do it anymore. Well, sure enough, we've done 2 or 3 since, including a fundraiser for Ukraine that was probably the most beautifully executed of them. I mean, the most seamlessly executed, maybe not the most beautiful.
Over and over again, we thought we were at the end of the pandemic. Over and over
right.
again.
So anyway, I'm going on too long. I was very excited about it, and it does have me questioning, honestly, why did people watch? Since it wasn't theater, since some people wanted to stay away from virtual theater or virtual presentations entirely, unless they had the inspiration and the archive, as Jonathan did, to say, here's our work. Or Irish Rep did wonderful experiments. A lot of different people tried different things, and there's Theater in Quarantine was another way of approaching how to communicate. But I think the most vital thing, which I want to pass along to everybody watching, is theater is this immediate event. The fact that you're here doing it and people are watching you and sharing this moment, just as we are now, was ever and again, maybe all the more important because we couldn't get together and because we felt so frightened and isolated. Theater, even though it was this constrained theater, and even though we were continuing to invent and make it more playful all the time with sort of technical wizardry, was a vital way of connecting with both the artists I love to work with, and as I say, give them some money, but also with an audience that responded with support that put us in a wonderful position to come back. We've only managed to come back with 2 in-person productions, but have a healthier foundation than we've ever had for the coming season. We're planning The Sea Lady, one of the plays we actually did online, and this is a Provincetown play for October, with always the thought that, well, if it doesn't happen, we know how to do things online. So it really turned out, I felt like we won the pandemic, although we're not the only ones who did.
I want to thank you both, because you've proven a point that I've been making for 2.5 years, which is that this is what we have. We have to learn how to use it. I've been a big proponent of using the virtual medium, and I've been a big proponent of really thinking things in terms of the virtual medium, which obviously you have done. You've learned a lot of technical tricks and things. I think that going forward, virtual is going to become part of the toolbox for many of us. I don't think it's going to go away just because we go live, because we found that there are perfectly good uses for it. You both have proven it. Your success during the pandemic has a lot to do with the fact that you embraced virtual and found ways to use what was available to us. So kudos to both of you. This conversation could probably go on for another week, but I'm going to have to end now. Normally, I would like the people in the room to ask questions and come in, but I'm going to do a wind up, and then we're going to actually maybe get together in breakout rooms for a couple minutes, or maybe 10 minutes or something like that. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Jonathan and Alex for being incredibly enlightening and generous and open, sometimes uncomfortably open, speakers for me. And I want to thank everybody in the room for being here and supporting and being part of the community and being a voice in the community. I hope that some of you will come in and have additional questions. And I want to just thank my YouTube viewers for being with us. If you want to be part of the conversation, if you want to be here in the room, email me at trunltd@aol.com. That's trunltd@aol.com. We'll invite you every week. When the weeks, Fridays that you can make it, you can join us in the room. When you can't, you can just catch us on YouTube. We also do this as a community service in many ways, and it's a pay what you can. I like to say that pay what you can sometimes means that you can pay something. So if you can pay something, our website donation link is truedonate.com. That's actually a simplification of what the actual URL is, but it'll get you there. Truedonate.com, TRUdonate.com. All donations are welcome. Now that we're facing going into live performance again, our expenses are going to be tripling. Just amazing how much more things are going to be costing us now that we go live. I'm going to stay virtual for a lot of our programming because otherwise I don't get to welcome people from all over the United States and even all over the world at times. So that's it. Join us next week. We have a platform called Stellar Ticketing, which is more than a ticketing service. It's a platform that allows ticketing plus a whole range of services. After that, the week after, we have Vosa Rivers, who's going to be my guest. A lot of you should know who Vosa Rivers is. He's a legendary producer in our business. And every week I'm going to hopefully have something that you'll find of interest. So that's it. Thank you, everyone.